So there have been a lot of televised political debates over the years, and a lot of them have featured Joe Biden. He was on the debate stages in 1988 and 2008 and 2012 and 2020, and we're not even counting 2024 yet. But if you had to pick one moment where Joe Biden was able to beat back his critics and win the moment in as few words as possible, it would probably be this one.
An editorial in the Los Angeles Times said, in addition to his uncontrolled verbosity, Biden is a gaffe machine. Can you reassure voters in this country that you would have the discipline you would need on the world stage, Senator?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Biden.
That was Joe Biden during the 2008 Democratic presidential primary debates. And while moments like that did not win Biden the Democratic nomination, we later learned that his performance on stage was a real factor in why Barack Obama chose Joe Biden to be his running mate. It's also a reminder that Biden can be a very effective debater when he is calm and when he is in control. By contrast, there's his opponent, Donald Trump. Not a person who would ever willingly give up 28 seconds of a 30-second time allotment to make a point. Trump, as we saw in the 2016 and 2020 debates, is not a creature of restraint or even strategy per se. Today, Trump gave an interview to the Washington Examiner where he talked about the upcoming debate and told his interviewer that he thinks debating is an attitude more than it is anything else, which makes sense if you've ever seen Donald Trump in a debate. In that same interview, Trump was asked about whether or not his attitude had ever failed him. This is the reporter. A lot of people thought in the first debate with Biden that you were somewhat overamped, that you just went after him too much. Trump, that I interrupted him. Yeah, I think, reporter. Do you agree with that? Mm-hmm. Trump answered. Then, after a short pause, Trump defended the interruptions before conceding that, yes, there were too many. So, yes, even Donald Trump is aware that his attitude can hurt him on the debate stage, especially when he is overamped.
Vote and let your senators know how strongly you feel. Vote now.
Are you gonna pack the
Make
court?
sure you, in fact, let people know
He doesn't want
you're a
to answer the
senator.
question.
I'm not going to answer the question
Why
because
wouldn't you answer that
because
question?
the question
You
is
want to put a lot of
the
new
question
Supreme Court
is
justice,
the
radical
question-
left.
Will you
Who
shut
is
up,
your-
man?
listen.
Trump's attitude problems do not end with his treatment of his opponents. Trump is also at his worst when he's interrupting the moderators.
I'm going to give you a minute to answer, sir. You have repeatedly criticized.
I have to answer his statement.
No, you have
His
repeatedly.
statement. Wait,
you have
just one
no,
second.
you've been talking
He
back
made
and
a
forth.
statement.
I'm asking you.
I would
no,
love
you
to
know,
end it.
sir.
I would love to end it, and
You know,
we
if
would
you want to
very
switch seats,
we would
could
very quickly.
We could do that.
So being overamped with opponents, not good. Talking over the moderator, also not good. But Donald Trump is also at his worst when he is on the defensive, as in this moment with Senator Marco Rubio during the Republican primary debates in 2016.
And I have to say this, he hit my hands. Nobody has ever hit my hands. I've never heard of this one. Look at those hands. Are they small hands? And he referred to my hands. If they're small, something else must be small. I guarantee you there's no problem. I guarantee it.
Not that effective and also just really gross. As the debates have shown us, Trump is defensive about a lot of things, and not just his undersized hands, but also his cozy relationship with certain autocrats.
Look, Putin, from everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
No puppet. It's like watching someone pour water into a Teddy Ruxpin battery pack. Now, as bad as the no puppet defense was, it was not nearly as shocking, not nearly as disqualifying as his defense of election denial back in 2016.
Do you make the same commitment that you will absolutely, sir, that you will absolutely accept the result of this election?
I will look at it at the time. I'm not looking at anything now. I'll look at it at the time.
Are you saying you're not prepared now to commit
What
to
I'm
that
saying
principle?
is that I will tell you at the time. I'll keep you in suspense.
Well,
okay?
Chris.
But Trump's most infamous moment in any debate was when he was forced to respond to a question about his relationship with white supremacists and offered not a condemnation, but a call to arms.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups?
What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white like me to condemn?
White
Proud
supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by.
So, okay, if you're the Biden campaign right now, reviewing Trump's worst debate moments, it is clear that there is a lot to work with. That is, if you want to spend the whole debate teasing out the insecure and undisciplined and destructive side of Donald Trump. But what about Joe Biden himself? How much of this debate should he spend on his not insignificant accomplishments as president? Does Biden talk about shepherding through the biggest investments in climate and infrastructure in a generation? Or the long list of actions he's taken on behalf of everyday Americans, like working to end junk fees and lowering drug costs and suing to end big monopolies? Or the historically strong American economy he's overseen, which, by the way, the World Bank recently said is so strong that it actually bolstered the entire world economy after a global pandemic. How much time should President Biden spend focusing on all of that? And how much time should he spend highlighting the autocrat-admiring, white supremacist allied election denier with the small hands who likes to interrupt everyone all the time? That is really the question.
No puppet. No puppet. And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
Joining me now are co-hosts of Pod Save America, the hit podcast, Jon Favreau and Tommy Vitor, together with John Lovett, who's not here this evening. They are the authors of a new book. It is called Democracy or Else: How to Save Democracy in 10 Easy Steps. Guys, thank you for being here. You could bake brownies in 10 easy steps, or you could save democracy. It's
either or.
It's your choice. Before we get to the book, which is essential reading in this particular moment, I do want to talk about, you guys are astute observers of politics. You understand the strategy that goes behind the scenes in terms of prepping presidents or leaders for important moments. And I do wonder, as we barrel towards this debate on Thursday, when you think about the sort of essential question that Biden is faced with, how much to run on his own record, how much to highlight what he's done versus how much to try and put Trump on defense, what do you think the breakdown is, and how do you think of it strategically, John?
I think that the president has to frame his accomplishments as down payments on what he wants to continue to do for the next 4 years. I mean, I know the slogan they've been using is finish the job.
Yeah.
I think that's smart because, if people aren't feeling the effects of the legislation that he's passed yet, you don't want to seem like you're talking past people.
Yeah.
But I think as quickly as he can pivot to the choice in the election, right? So it's like, insulin's $35 now for seniors. I wanted to make it $35 for everyone. Republicans blocked it. Donald Trump's against it. If you give me another 4 years, I'll make it $35 for everyone. If you give Donald Trump another 4 years, he's going to take away your health care.
Do you think, as a practical matter, Tommy, it's possible to really give those details in the format of a debate, which I think we all agree is like a mud wrestling match that we've decided serves some utility in American politics? Maybe it does. The Biden campaign clearly thinks it does because they wanted this debate. And I just wonder really, as a matter of strategy, does he have to choose? Can he do both, as John is suggesting? I
mean, I think what John's getting is the mistake is making this a referendum about your accomplishments and getting defensive and sounding defensive. And I think with a 2-minute answer, when Trump's mic is ostensibly muted, we don't know if Jake Tapper is going to hog tie him and silence him if he starts screaming.
I'm going to guess no. When I hear the phrase Jake Tapper and hog tie, they don't go together.
Well, you don't know Jake the way I know Jake.
Yeah, fair enough.
Hogs in our day. So I think you can get out, the first half is like, here's what I've done, here's what I'm fighting for, here's why this guy is actually just fighting for his rich donors and his friends and to keep himself out of prison.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk. I mean, just if we could go blow by blow in terms of the issues that they're likely to tackle. I mean, first and foremost, Trump has been talking about the border. He's been talking about migrant UFC fights over the weekend. Immigration is something Republicans feel like they have Democrats in a corner on. And if you're Biden and you're talking to him behind the scenes at the debate, what is the strategy for talking about the broken deal that Trump ruined on the border and also, defending the policy that he just launched?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it comes to him, the border first, Biden can easily say, look, I just took an executive action on the border, and I had to do that because we had a deal that would have been better, and there was a bipartisan deal in Congress. This guy told Republicans to kill the deal because he wanted the issue to run on, because for him it's all about politics. And I just made sure that families can stay together, especially spouses, undocumented spouses of American citizens who've been in this country for 10 years. And the difference is he ripped families apart when he was president. I want to keep families together.
I feel like saying child separations over and over and over again is the rejoinder any Democrat needs to use, and specifically this Democrat, right?
Absolutely. But I also think he has to recognize that a lot of people feel like there is a problem at the border, and that everyone across all demographics in both parties, they are concerned about disorder and chaos at the border, and they just want a system that's regularized and that works. And the problem is Congress not passing a law that could take care of it in its totality, but he needs to make that case.
I mean, I guess one of the things I worry about, and as you talk about holding together the Democratic coalition, though, is and this is a careful balance, right? Acknowledging the chaos at the border while also not dehumanizing the people who are looking for a better tomorrow, who in many ways, John, form the backbone of the American economy. And I wonder if you think there's any peril in playing too much, I guess I'll call it hardball, on the topic of migrants coming over the border.
I've been spending a lot of time for another podcast we do, The Wilderness, focus groups of Latino voters.
Yeah.
And one thing that gets conflated is people talk about immigration, and a lot of voters actually see the border as separate from immigration, including Latino voters. And for a lot of these voters, the border is an issue of public safety. And so they're saying, okay, new arrivals, we want people to come into this country, but we want it to be orderly. We need a border. But then people who have been in this country for years, who may be undocumented, people are much more welcoming of those. So I think you have to separate out what's going on at the border and say, yes, we are going to be tough on the border. We're going to have a secure border. That's important. We don't want chaos. But if you've been here for years and you've been working hard and you're law-abiding and you don't have a criminal record, we want you in this country. We want to give you a path to citizenship.
Okay, and I think you just separating the two and making it a distinction, even though in theory, I'll just point out that people that are coming over and undocumented now and working to support the U.S. economy in 10 years could be those same people. But I digress. Sure. That is a level of nuance that this debate is not going to be able to tolerate. On abortion, Tommy, I know you guys have talked about this on Pod Save America this week, but Trump's going to push this to the states, as he has repeatedly when asked what his policy on abortion is. And my question is, both for Democrats and Republicans in swing states who feel like, okay, it's really bad in a place like Alabama, it's bad in the Deep South, but is it really ever going to get bad in my state? I mean, how do you create a sense of urgency if you're Joe Biden around that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to tell the story of Donald Trump's election and the people he put on the Supreme Court and how it led to this outcome, but then also talk about what their plan is to do next. I mean, they are going to push for a federal abortion ban. Full stop. It's going to happen. They're going to push for limits on IVF. They're talking about getting rid of contraception. I mean, there is a radical right-wing base that comes along with Donald Trump. There are a bunch of weirdos that you don't want in your bedroom. And I think he has to tell that broader story, because there's a lot of people that don't view Trump as someone who they think is sort of socially conservative. But in fact, his entire party is.
Well, if he's not socially conservative, it's about making him seem like he just doesn't care what happens to families who are trying to exercise control over bodily autonomy.
And I'm sure Donald Trump's going to be up there and say, there's not going to be a national abortion ban if I'm president. It's like, okay, do you want to trust the guy who last time said abortion's not on the ballot? Last time we debated? And then now we have abortion bans. 1 in 3 women in the country live under abortion bans. You're going to trust this guy when he says he's not going to do a federal abortion ban, when all of the people he wants to staff his administration with are pushing very hard for not even a legislative ban, for him to take action on his own to ban birth control and abortion across the country? I don't think people want to trust that.
Do you think the support, we're in a week where we're waiting for several landmark decisions from the court. And I kind of wonder, Tommy, whether, I mean, traditionally the Supreme Court gets a certain group of the electorate exercised, whether it's right-wing conservatives or whether it's, court-watching Democrats who understand the dynamics of the court. Do you think it carries more weight in a moment like this? I mean, we're going to have decisions tomorrow night as going into this debate. And I wonder if you think that that's an arrow in Biden's quiver.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a moment when a lot of people are paying attention to this debate and a lot of important things are going to happen at the court. And you can make that case in that moment and seize on that opportunity to bring some attention to the power of the court and the opportunity that Donald Trump will have to name like the most right-wing 32-year-old he can find to the courts for the next 4 years and just completely stack the deck against us. So, yeah, I do think it's an important case to be made.
It's a weird position for an institutionalist like Biden to bring up any of the nefarious, questionable activities, the extracurricular activities of people like Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas. But certainly the sort of partisan makeup of the bench is fair game if you're talking about what happens in the next 4 years. John, and Tommy, the economy, right? This is the most, I think, tricky terrain for Biden, right? This goes back to your first answer where it's like the fight, what is it? The work continues,
finish the job.
Finish the job.
Finish the job.
It's the Patriots.
And, sure, it's Super Bowl 79.
Yes.
He has, like, I think the thing that's frustrating to Democrats and progressives is the amount of economic populism Biden has put into action, whether it's capping insulin prices, whether it's taking on large corporations, banning junk fees, taking on Live Nation, being the first president to walk the picket line. I do wonder whether he's going to really be able to talk about any of that tonight because so much of his posture already feels like it's on the back foot, right? With Trump and the inflation message resonates to an eerie degree among the American public.
Yeah, and that's why I think he can't spend a ton of time talking about what he's accomplished, even though he has accomplished a lot. He can say, when I got into office, because of the pandemic, inflation spiked all over the world. It's come down faster here than anywhere else. But you know what? People were dealing with high costs before the pandemic.
Yeah.
People have been dealing with high costs for decades. And right now, housing is too expensive and healthcare is too expensive. And so I am working every single day to bring those costs down. We've got some done, but we need to do a lot more. Last time Donald Trump was in office, he gave a corporate tax cut to rich people. He wants to do another one. Do we think that that's going to be the best move for the middle class in this country? That's the choice in the election.
I mean, that must be so frustrating for a president, though, I have to say, right? Ron Klain going out there and saying, stop talking about bridges. What is it? Biden spending too much time praising bridges that are being built instead of connecting with voters. I mean, I'm sure Ron Klain is telling Joe Biden that right now. He's helping with debate prep.
Barack Obama, in the first answer of the debate against Mitt Romney, when he lost that debate, instead of hitting Mitt Romney on his tax plan, which the moderator set him up to do, he started talking about his achievements on Race to the Top and education. And I remember, I was just watching the clip the other day, I remember all of us backstage were just like, oh no. And Ron told him, be careful about doing that,
because that's what he's been spending his time on, and it matters. Yeah. I do wonder, there's this famous piece of sound of Ronald Reagan in 1984 addressing his age. Can we play it? Do we have time? Let's play it.
I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
First of all, the Wayback Machine, that was it. That was shut down the age speculation, right? And it's almost impossible to imagine there's going to be any one thing Biden can say. But I do wonder how you think he should, broach it and whether he should go on offense about it first.
Yeah, I mean, it is remarkable that a okay zinger by a literal trained actor shut down a debate about his age.
Right.
Anyway, but I think for Biden,
we continue to play it to this day. Anyway.
It's incredible. But I mean, Biden, it's going to be more how he looks, his energy, how he sounds, whether he's punchy, whether he finishes his thoughts instead of cutting himself off. I mean, a lot of this is just performance. It's theater camp for politicians, and hopefully, they're practicing these things. He's going to get them up and energized and rested, and that's the best bet.
If Joe Biden is elected to the White House and we have a Democratic majority in the House, even a skinny Democratic majority in the House, and we have a Democratic majority in the Senate, then we are going to make Roe versus Wade law of the land. Count on it.
That was Senator Elizabeth Warren at an event in Wisconsin last night, promising to restore the right to choose in a second Biden term. It is a promise that Democrats across the country are running on right now, and it is a compelling one. But it is also worth remembering that Democrats had control of the White House and both houses of Congress when Roe v. Wade was first struck down, and they still were not able to overcome Republican opposition. So it's going to take more than just winning in November to do things like restoring the right to an abortion. It may very well take a movement of people organizing around the country, working with Democrats and the White House to overcome right-wing obstruction. And the question now is how to build a movement that can win the next election and keep pushing for a more representative democracy after that. Well, my guests have just written a new book on how to do exactly that. It is called Democracy or Else: How to Save America in 10 Easy Steps. Don't let the title fool you. It's much easier than that. First, John, I mean, this seems like a complicated proposition, right? We want people to be invested in this election, which is already a bar to clear, and then to stick around and still remain invested in democracy. And I sort of just wonder where you think the most powerful coalition building opportunities are right now in the Democratic Party.
I mean, one thing we've learned over the last 7 years doing Pod Save America, talking to activists and organizers is, we're all spectators of national politics, and that can make us depressed, it can make us confused, it can make us terrified. When you start getting involved in politics, whether it's national politics or especially like local politics in your own community, and you start doing it in real life and not just online, you start meeting people, then like you're still going to feel the disappointments of losing and setbacks once in a while, but you're also going to feel like the sense of agency, like you're actually accomplishing something. You're going to feel a sense of purpose, and it's sort of good for the soul to be involved in politics.
It's like gardening.
Yeah, it is. And when the disappointments inevitably come, the fact that you were involved and that you were meeting people and talking to people and persuading people, it's going to make you feel better and it's going to make you stay involved longer.
It's such an interesting social observation because we've lost the public square in a lot of ways. We don't meet each other. We don't talk to each other. We're not in person with each other. Their church attendance has gone down. And politics has become very tribal, and it offers a sense of belonging. But it's mostly people on Twitter fighting, right? This is a chance to bring that passion and those connections into the real world. And I wonder, when you talk about people volunteering, I think a lot of our soulful, amazing audience is, read in on the topics. They're aware, they're voting. Yeah. The next step is to actually become involved. Running for office is one thing, but just in terms of volunteering, can you talk a little bit about how, what are the 10 easy steps to get involved in a campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing we wanted to really tell people is that it can be very fun. Like, we were so lucky to work for Obama. It was fun, it was inspiring, it was hopeful, it was not the slog of the last 8 years. We can get back to a point where this is fun again. So we try to make the point, too, that it's not a zero-sum game. Like, it's not all or nothing. You can just get better educated on the news. That's one step. You can, we talk about how to donate well. We can talk about organizations where you can organize, working on a campaign, running for office yourself. I think the book ends with you as a disgraced one-term president, you, the reader. So, it's a ladder of engagement of how you can be involved, and it's fun and it's silly, but like ultimately, it's a hopeful book about why it matters to care and to participate in person in politics.
Do you think that one side or the other is better at doing this and keeping people engaged? And if so, why?
I will say that I've heard from a lot of people who have covered Trump rallies, have gone to Trump rallies as observers. There is this, they feel like there's this sense of community and fun.
Yeah, as someone who's been observing at Trump rallies as a member of the media, it is a revival.
Yeah. And like Donald Trump aside, right? It's like, who cares about him? We're just here to hang out. And look, we have experienced this just doing Pod Save America for the last 7 years. I remember right after Trump won, we were at, and we tell the story in the book, we were at a live show in Denver, and we took questions at the end, and this young woman stood up and she said, I drove here all the way from Utah. I'm a dreamer. I'm scared. And everyone immediately stood up and started clapping for her and saying, like, we love you. And then we're like, okay, what's your question? And she's like, I want to know what's happening in the Utah 4th. And like, do we have a chance to flip this? And it was just a perfect, it's like, it's this community of people getting together and being supportive, but also like this eagerness to get involved.
Right. And caring about the outcome because they feel like, well, A, they have some agency, but the stakes are so extraordinarily high, which leads me to my sort of last question in this, which is there is such an excess of trauma around the last, 8 years. 2020 was really hard. And I know a lot of people, I'm sure you guys do, who are just like, I'll deal with it in October. I'll like deal with it in November, or maybe I won't deal with it at all. And I wonder, it's like, how do you keep ringing the alarm bell in a way that makes people listen? Because every election for the last 2 cycles has been the most important election of our lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's really hard for people is the conversation is about the individuals involved. It's like, is Joe Biden too old or is Donald Trump too crazy? And it's always about them. If you make it about yourself, your family, the things you care about, if you have kids, like, do you want them to live in a world where we're actually trying to combat climate change or not?
Yeah.
Do you want to live in a world where your daughter has make decisions about her own reproductive rights or not? I mean, I think if you think about it that way and what it means for you and vote for yourself or volunteer for yourself, that's how you stay engaged.
Yeah, make it personal, which is like the key. You know, that's politics 101, I guess. I wouldn't know. I've never run anything, but gents, congratulations on the book, Democracy or Else, How to Save America in 10 Easy Steps. I couldn't even bake a brownie in 10 easy steps, so this seems like a win-win for everybody. Thank you guys for being here, Jon Favreau.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
You too.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.